Panicked lies, fake cancer claims, different coloured plates, and an admission that wild mushrooms were foraged and used in a deadly dish.
In the peaceful town of Leongatha, Victoria, Australia, a tragedy unfolded that would shock the nation. A family gathering meant to bring estranged relatives together for a reunion turned into a nightmare that would captivate the public's attention. On July 29, 2023, Erin Patterson, a seemingly quiet and unassuming woman, invited her estranged in-laws to her home for a meal. What happened next was a nightmare. 3 of her guests were dead by the following day, and 1 was critically ill. The cause? Death cap mushrooms, among the deadliest fungi on Earth.
The trial of Erin Patterson begins today.
First to breaking news from the mushroom meal murder trial.
Erin Patterson now stands accused of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. She has consistently maintained her innocence, insisting that the deaths were an unfortunate accident. However, the prosecution paints a much darker picture, claiming that Erin orchestrated the deaths of her guests using mushrooms she had foraged herself, hoping to eliminate those who stood in her way.
Erin Patterson told the jury he too was invited to the lunch where she served up deadly mushrooms and a beef Wellington, something Erin Patterson denies, previously telling reporters it was all an accident.
With the case continuing to unfold in the courtroom, the shocking details of the tragedy have left the community in shock and the nation in disbelief. The gathering storm Erin Patterson's relationship with her estranged husband, Simon Patterson, had been fraught with tension for years. Separated since 2015, their interactions were few and far between. Erin, however, reached out in July 2023, citing a deeply personal reason. She claimed to have been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and wanted to discuss how to break the news to their 2 children. In a gesture that seemed to call for healing, Erin invited Simon and his parents, Don and Gail Patterson, to her home, along with Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, and Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, for a lunch. Simon, feeling uncomfortable with the situation, declined the invitation. Nevertheless, the gathering went ahead as planned. Erin prepared a lavish meal, including beef Wellington, mashed potatoes, and green beans. What none of the guests knew at the time, however, was that the dish also contained something deadly, death cap mushrooms. Erin allegedly foraged these mushrooms herself, without the knowledge or consent of her guests, who had no idea of the danger they were in.
A Victorian woman accused of murdering members of her extended family.
The following day, all 4 guests fell seriously ill. They were hospitalized with symptoms that resembled those of death cap mushroom poisoning. Tragically, Don, Gail, and Heather passed away within a matter of days. Ian Wilkinson, though gravely ill, survived after a long and difficult stay in the hospital. The toxic truth. The death cap mushroom, scientifically known as Amanita phalloides, is infamous for its extreme toxicity. It contains potent toxins called amatoxins, which cause severe damage to the liver and kidneys. Without rapid medical intervention, ingestion of the mushroom often leads to death. The fact that Erin's guests had consumed death cap mushrooms.
First tonight, Erin Patterson's triple murder trial in Morwell has heard from 3 of her Facebook friends.
Is not merely a coincidence, but the basis of the prosecution's argument that this tragedy was no accident. When authorities began investigating the deaths, they discovered that Erin had a history of foraging for wild mushrooms. She had purchased a food dehydrator from a local store, which raised suspicions. Further investigation revealed CCTV footage showing her discarding the dehydrator at a transfer station shortly after the deaths occurred. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the dehydrator contained traces of the same toxins that were found in the victims' bodies. Additionally, Erin's cancer diagnosis, a claim that had motivated the family gathering, was found to be a fabrication. There were no medical records to substantiate her story, suggesting that Erin had lied to manipulate her guests into attending the lunch.
Today, the jury in her triple murder trial heard in the months before the deadly lunch at her home, she posted about how excited she was to buy a food dehydrator. "I've been hiding powdered mushrooms in everything. Mixed it into chocolate brownies yesterday. The kids had no idea."
The false cancer diagnosis added an eerie layer of deception to an already tragic story, leading many to question Erin's motives and actions. The defense's argument, Erin Patterson's defense team has vehemently denied any premeditated intent to harm her guests. They argue that the deaths were a tragic accident and that Erin had no idea the mushrooms she foraged were deadly. According to the defense, Erin panicked after learning of the deaths and lied about her cancer diagnosis as a way to cope with the grief. They contend that Erin was a mother who cared deeply for her children and her in-laws, and that she had no reason to harm them.
Anything but good and kind to me. And Ian and Heather were some of the best people I've ever met. They never did anything wrong to me, and I'm so devastated.
The defense has focused on Erin's lack of a clear motive. If she truly wanted to hurt anyone, they argue she could have simply not invited them. Moreover, the defense suggests that the prosecution has not provided enough evidence to prove that Erin intentionally set out to poison her guests. While Erin may have been reckless in foraging wild mushrooms, they assert that this was not an act of malice. The prosecution's case. The prosecution, however, offers a far more sinister narrative. They argue that Erin Patterson meticulously planned the deaths of her in-laws and their relatives, using the meal as a weapon. The prosecution highlights her history of deception, including the fake cancer diagnosis, and points to the critical evidence of the dehydrator. According to the prosecution, Erin's actions before and after the incident suggest a calculated attempt to eliminate people she viewed as obstacles or unwanted in her life. Key to the prosecution's argument is the fact that Erin had a significant history of foraging for mushrooms, and the death cap variety she allegedly used is notoriously difficult to distinguish from edible mushrooms. Yet Erin had access to multiple sources of information about wild mushrooms and the potential dangers associated with them. Her decision to forage for mushrooms and incorporate them into the meal seems highly suspicious, especially given the absence of any warning to her guests. Furthermore, the prosecution points to Erin's actions following the incident. After the deaths occurred, Erin seemed to distance herself from the victims. Her statements to authorities were inconsistent, and she appeared far less distraught than one might expect from a person whose guests had just tragically died. Her behavior, they argue, was more indicative of a person attempting to cover her tracks than of a grieving daughter-in-law. The impact on the community. The case has left the close-knit community of Leongatha reeling. Erin Patterson was known to most as a quiet, unassuming woman. Her sudden involvement in such a horrific crime has left locals grappling with disbelief and horror. The idea that someone they once knew could be responsible for such a heinous act has caused ripples of shock and confusion throughout the town. Memorials for the victims have been held, with tributes pouring in from the local community and beyond. Family members have expressed their grief and heartbreak, struggling to come to terms with the loss of their loved ones. Meanwhile, the trial has drawn national and international attention, as many people closely follow the developments of a case that has captured the public's imagination. The specter of a family member being responsible for such a gruesome crime has sparked intense debate and speculation. The trial begins. The trial of Erin Patterson began on April 29, 2025, in the Supreme Court of Victoria at Morwell.
The trial of Erin Patterson begins today.
First to breaking news from the mushroom meal murder trial.
Arriving at court today where his estranged wife stands accused of murdering his family. The trial's first witness, Simon Patterson, told the jury he too was invited to the lunch where she served up deadly mushrooms and a beef Wellington.
The jury was presented with compelling evidence, including forensic analyses, CCTV footage, and witness testimony. The prosecution's case laid out the events leading up to the deaths, providing a chilling picture of how a family meal could be transformed into a deadly weapon. They argued that Erin's actions were deliberate and premeditated, aimed at achieving a specific goal. The defense, however, has yet to present its case, but Erin maintains her innocence. She insists that the deaths were a tragic accident and that her actions were not intended to cause harm. As the trial continues, both sides will attempt to convince the jury of their version of the truth, and the outcome of the case remains uncertain. Conclusion: the Erin Patterson mushroom murders case serves as a stark reminder of how trust can be so easily poisoned, especially when deception lurks behind seemingly innocent acts. What began as a simple family gathering quickly turned into a tragedy that would haunt a community and a family forever. The line between intention and accident has blurred, leaving the public questioning Erin's true motives and the dark depths of her actions. As the trial unfolds, the nation watches closely, awaiting answers to the many questions that remain. Was this a carefully planned murder, or an unfortunate series of events driven by poor judgment and a series of lies? Only time will tell. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. Your support helps us bring you in-depth analyses of the most intriguing and disturbing cases. Stay safe and always be cautious about who you trust.